Never was it God's intention for us to live a life with anxiety, for us to live a life of stress. God's heart and desire was for us to always be in unity and alignment with Him. And so we are going to offer something that is called the Blessed Life. It is a financial stewardship study that is truly going to change the way you think about finances. God's intention from the very beginning was for us to trust Him because He wanted our hearts to be aligned with Him, and He wanted to have a life of blessings for us. Tithing is a principle that is all over the Bible. In Genesis chapter 14, 19 through 20, this was the first example of a tithe. It says, "And He blessed him and said, Blessed be Abram, God Most High, possessor of heaven and earth, and blessed be God Most High, who has delivered your enemies into your hand. And Abram gave him a tenth of everything." As God continued to lead people and as God continued to challenge those, we see over scripture and over that the tithe was something that He wanted us to take serious, and the only topic in the entire Bible that He actually asked us to test Him. In Malachi chapter 3, verse 8-9, it says, "Will a man rob God? Yet you are robbing me. But you say, how have I robbed you?" And He says, "In your tithes and contributions. You are cursed with a curse, for you are robbing me, the whole nation, of you." And this was just a moment where God was reminding those that followed Him that there's a better way of living. We talk about tithing, we talk about giving every week at South Hills. We want to take 6 weeks to walk you through a journey that is going to transform your heart and transform your life. And we're going to be offering it on a Tuesday evening at 6:30 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, where you can log in online. So I'm going to ask you to take some time to join us on this series. And our CFO is actually going to be hosting and leading us through it. His name is Steve Robinson, and you can email him to reserve your spot, steve.robinson@southhills.org. And I don't want you to miss it. Why? Because it truly is going to bless your life.
We have been in this series called Defeating Depression, and we've been talking about mental health stuff all month long. And far and away, I've been a pastor for, a long time, probably more years than I want to say, and done a lot of series, done a lot of teaching. I've been with South Hills for a long time, and far and away, this series, we've gotten the most response to this series in all different directions. Lots of people leaning in and finding hope because there's just something that's really, really incredibly powerful and hopeful when you're hurting or you're going through something really painful and dark, and someone comes along and says, "Yeah, me too. Like I've been there. You can make it." Because all of a sudden in that moment, you're not alone. And as much as that has happened, and it's happened a lot every single week of the service, there's also been people who have had a really hard time kind of relating to or finding their place in the conversation, which I can actually understand as well. Because if you haven't been down this road yourself, or you haven't been down this road with somebody that's close to you or that you love, it's really hard to kind of wrap your mind around it. Especially if you've been around church for any length of time, because churches kind of specialize in spiritual answers and spiritual healing. And what makes it challenging is that some of the physical and emotional and mental problems that we experience actually do stem from spiritual issues. Some depression is actually spiritual in nature. But there's also a lot of other situations, there's a lot of other parts of this conversation that aren't really spiritual at all, at least in the way that we think about them. I was thinking this week that there's so much time and energy that we spend in our culture about trying to be healthy physically, about trying to be healthy in our bodies and keep ourselves strong. There's a lot of conversation even in our culture around trying to be healthy financially, right? But so often those things don't matter if our mental health are just an absolute wreck. If we don't actually take care of our interior life, if we don't take care of our soul, it won't matter that our bodies are strong and healthy. And so the bottom line for me is that I want our church to be for everyone, no matter where you are on the spiritual spectrum, no matter what your story has been, no matter what your baggage is with God or the Bible or church, that church should be a place that hurting people run to and not run away from. And I want people every single week when they step into these doors or they tune in online to know that there is hope, that there is healing, that there is a path forward for them. The question becomes for all of us, and maybe in this conversation more so than others, is what does that path actually look like? Well, one of the things that I enjoy in life is the ridiculous kind of before and after comparisons that we get in marketing sometimes or on social media. You know what I'm talking about? Where they show somebody and the lighting's really bad and they're wearing, they look like they just rolled out of bed, and the before and after pictures are the exact same except they just actually took a shower. Anybody know what I'm talking about? And sometimes there's almost like no difference, right? Or sometimes the difference is so drastic in Photoshop that it's obvious. But have you ever had that experience where you bump into somebody that you haven't seen in a while, and they look and they sound and they seem great, like way better than you kind of remember them looking and sounding and seeming? Whether it was because they lost weight or they just seem happier or healthier or just kind of lighter somehow. And in those moments, you kind of want to know, like, what happened? Like, what happened to you? What did you do? What changed? Especially if their change is with something that you've kind of been struggling with or something that you're kind of interested in, because we live in a shortcut, kind of silver bullet, secret hack, life hack, obsessed culture, right? Where we want to know, how did you do that? How can I get in on that? How can I figure out and do the thing that you did so that I can have that kind of change that you had? And then so often though, when we hear their story, when we hear what they did, our reaction is usually one of three things. Like, oh man, that's a bummer. Like I already tried that. Like I already been down that road. It didn't work for me. Or just like, that'll never work for me. I'm not the same as you. Or that's cool, but no thanks. That sounds like a lot of work and I don't really want to do that. See, I think sometimes we allow the challenges that we're facing or we allow our own thinking or the embarrassment of not actually knowing how to tackle something that just seems obvious or easy to other people to keep us from actually doing the things that could have an enormous impact on our lives. And at the same time, you know, when we're the ones who have made a change or experienced healing or found freedom, so often we allow the possibility of the negative reactions we might get from people, if we're just really open and honest about our stories, to keep us from actually sharing what that journey has looked like. Now, normally at this point in the message, I usually take you to the story of somebody in the scriptures and we look at their story to learn from them. But today is going to be a little bit different. We're still going to be looking at the scriptures here in just a little bit, but instead of using a story from the Bible, I asked my wife, Hansi, if she'd be willing to join me on the stage, and together, if we could share some of our experiences, because she has had a really long and a really messy mental health journey. She's been through some really, really deep waters and some really dark places, and has pursued just about every avenue of treatment that's out there, and has come out the other side. And so would you do me a favor? I think this is the first time, at least at this campus, that my wife has taken the stage with me. Would you welcome my wife to the stage? Come on up, babe. There we go. You do have to get your own stool. Sorry about that. Told you we needed a stage hand. All right. So I'm going to keep this over here because it's going to tell me all the stuff I want to ask you so that I don't forget and we don't. You like that? I didn't know what title to put underneath your name, so I just called you Awesome Sauce. You're the awesome sauce of this church. All right. So as we kind of get going, why don't you kind of give people an overview of what your mental health journey overall has looked like?
Yeah, for sure. So mental health issues run in my family. I have an uncle that I lost to depression and several cousins that I lost to depression. So genetically, it's all there, right? It's in my genes. But looking back now at age 47, looking into my childhood, I struggled as a child, as a teen, with depression and anxiety. But really, I wasn't diagnosed till I was 20, and that was after I had 5 brain surgeries from 1991 to 1995, and after those and my right temporal lobectomy, they diagnosed me with post-traumatic stress disorder, major depressive disorder, and anxiety disorder. So since then, since I've been 20, I've struggled daily with it all, and at some point, suicidal ideation and taking my life.
Yeah, it's been an interesting journey. Many of you know that we have been together since I was 12 years old. And so we have navigated all of that together. And this conversation is very personal for us. It's something that means a lot to us. So looking at your experience, Hans, would you talk just a little bit about like whether or not there's been kind of cycles or seasons to your mental health where things were better or worse? And if so, like, you know, what were those? What triggered those things, or why did that happen?
Okay, yeah. Well, they were really bad, right? When I got diagnosed, they were really bad. And I got medication. Well, we're going to talk about that later. But anyway.
You can talk about it now if you want to.
You asked me a question that's
okay.
kind of overlaps the next question.
That's all right.
So.
That's all right.
You're always talking over me. So.
Wow. We didn't rehearse this, you guys, all right? So
you gave me a plan, stick to the plan.
This might be like a little bit of marriage therapy up here as well.
Now I know what to expect second service, so we're good. So yeah, like when I got diagnosed, it was really bad, and it was bad for a while. I saw a psychiatrist, got medication, but then I was better. It kind of took a back seat for a while, and then as things happen in life, you know, trauma or experiences that we went through, it would all resurface again over and over. So it's super cyclical. But I would say always I'm mildly melancholy. I'm a little bit of an Eeyore. But so that's
needed
like
the mildly qualification. I think just melancholy would have worked.
I'm mostly melancholy.
Yes, there you go.
So even on my best days, I'm melancholy, but there, you know, like that's, for me, that's doing really well, and I'm coping, and it's a good cycle, and then it swings to like seriously suicidal.
Since you brought up Eeyore, like if Tigger and Eeyore got married, that's what our house is like. So yeah. So we have talked in this series. Well, let me back up. You know, because you brought up medication. So I think part of the journey for us has been just the evolution of understanding and the opportunities and the ways in which she could pursue different treatments. And so in the beginning, that treatment was almost exclusively medication. And then as we have realized, like, this is just a part of our life, and then just figuring out, not getting rid of medication per se, but what are the other things, you know, are there other opportunities, other things that we can do, which we'll talk about here in just a few minutes. So we've talked in this series about, you know, how the ingredients for struggling with anxiety and depression are usually present in us. They're you know, a lot, depending on, you know, your biochemistry and your brain chemistry. But sometimes those things aren't really obvious until something sort of triggers them. There's triggering events. And what does that look like in your story?
Right. Well, my big triggering event was my brain surgeries, for sure. Like, they changed my brain makeup, took the right side. So for me, that was my big triggering event. But like I said, it just brought it to the surface, right? I was already struggling. It was already there genetically. It just all got accentuated as soon as all that brain trauma happened.
So, I mean, for those of you that don't know, when she was a senior in high school, got diagnosed with epilepsy and some brain tumors and stuff, ultimately had a right temporal lobectomy. And so the ingredients for anxiety and depression already running in her family and being a part, and being in her life were made much worse by that brain surgery because they took her hippocampus and basically all of the emotional processing center of your brain.
My amygdala.
Yeah, and her amygdala. And so it just kind of stopped everything and just sort of started to pile up. So, that I think is really what sort of sent your journey off in a specific direction.
Yeah, that's the first time it came debilitating because I would be in bed, couldn't get out of bed. I was still going to college at the time at Sac State, but was bedridden a lot from anxiety and panic and depression. And yeah, so that was a huge triggering thing. And then, like I said, things got better. And then when the next trauma hit, like our infertility, then I felt like I was triggered all over again. And here we go down this rabbit hole.
Yeah. And in 2016, I've shared a little bit of that story with you guys. There's a lot of tragedy in our family. And that couple of years were really the darkest times in our lives, especially as adults. Can you talk a little bit about like those years and then sort of the process of healing coming out of that?
Yeah, I'll try. Honestly, as he was asking me to share, I was like, there's so much I don't remember from 2016 because of all of this. But due to my right temporal lobectomy, I was unable to process all the grief after Cheryl's murder and Brady's death, and I found myself spinning out. Like I couldn't cope. We had all 4 kids. Kelton was just a baby, but had all 4 of the kids. It really left me in the darkest place in my life. And I don't know that everybody knew how dark it was outside of Randy. Maybe, I was thinking leading up to the Sunday, like times where I was gone to appointments, but I would call you. And I remember crying, saying, I'm not coming home. I can't make it home. He's like, where are you going? I don't know. Like, I was going to end my life. But I really think only he knew the depth of where I was and how many times I sat with all my pills. But it was debilitating. When you spoke the other day about being overwhelmed and like that's what it is. Like, you don't know what to do. You don't know how to get help. You don't know how to seek it. You don't know if you can because you're just stuck. And that's where I ended up. It was the loneliest, most desperate time of my life. I don't want to revisit it. I don't know if I remember a lot of it. Unfortunately, I think my big kids do. And you do, obviously.
Yeah, I think lonely and desperate is a really good way to describe that season. There was many months, maybe more than a year, where she was only out of bed for maybe 5 or 6 hours a day. And some really couple of real scary moments where she had gone after she had started seeking some treatment. She was gone and would call me and say, I'm not coming home. I'm hurting you. I'm hurting the kids. I love you. I'll see you in heaven kind of stuff. And would not tell me where she was. And so there was some really, really scary moments. So I think for me, let me ask you this, and then I'll share, my answer to some of this. So where was God in all of this for you? Like what role did your faith and scripture and worship play during those dark times? And maybe not even in the darkest times, but even in the sort of mix of all of the things that you were pursuing to try to find some freedom and healing and hope.
Right. Well, God was always present, and he still is, right? So there were times, and I'm a pastor's wife during all of this, right? That we were leading our church in Northern California. But he was there. Did I always feel him? No, I didn't. Did I always know where he was? I didn't. If I'm completely honest, I felt really lost. But I'm thankful for the community I had around me. I had some amazing friends, amazing people in our area. to help me, and I saw Christ constantly in them. That was in the deepest, darkest times, right? But like the last 27 years, where has God been? God's right here. God's with me. Worship is so important to me. I found like the older I get, the better I get at dealing with depression, right? Managing depression. I know that worship is such an important part of my healing. When I go to those dark spots, worship is where I go. I go to be with Jesus, and it's become healing for me.
That's one of the external sort of signals to me right now is
when I got my worship going, right?
It's not that she doesn't listen to worship regularly, but like when it's on repeat and it's just all throughout the day, I know for sure that she's really, really struggling. I think, we talk a lot about community and why this kind of environment matters, and a faith community and small groups and building relationships matter. For me, it's not just about, hey, like this would be a great idea. Like the relationships that we had being a part of a faith community, like saved our lives and saved our family. Because when we couldn't find God, when God wasn't apparent, when he seemed most absent, the people that were closest to us, the people that were a part of our church, the people that were a part of our small groups, those were the people that we could see God in. And now, of course, looking back, when you're on the other side of things, you can look back, right? When you're not in the valley, you can look down and remember moments and remember experiences and remember and see God's hand and know that God was with you. But when you're in the dark and you're just feeling around, it's not so obvious. And that is where human beings with flesh and bone actually embody who Jesus is. And so you've been very open with kind of sharing your journey and experiences the last 5 or 6 years, especially online. And what has been kind of the biggest sort of reward of that? What has been the biggest challenge in doing that? What have you learned from sharing your story with other people?
I laugh because when he asked me that this week preparing, I said, people are the hardest part of sharing. People, it's people who don't understand, right? And especially that has been my experience in the church, people who don't understand. And so that makes it really difficult in sharing because you get judged a lot. And when I decided to take my story on Facebook, I think it was like 2017, is when I started writing what was happening because I felt so alone and I thought I can't be the only one. But I got a lot of criticism, like people telling me, you shouldn't be saying this, you're a pastor's wife, you can't be this authentic. But that's honestly all we know. Is like we are who we are, and this is who I am.
If you guys know us, you know we're a mess, and so there's no hiding that mess. So we're just going to be messy and just own it.
Right. So that's what I was tired of being alone. So I think people have been the hardest part, and they still are. Honestly, people are hard.
Certainly, people like that have approached you, have approached me, and just been like, "Hey, like we get it. It's really difficult, but maybe you should like tell her to tone it down, tamp it down, stop saying that kind of stuff on social media. Nobody's gonna want to follow you." And I was like, well, first of all, I don't actually control my wife. I don't control what she posts about. She's an adult and gets to say whatever she wants. But also, like, I think that there's something really profound because what happened, and you can speak a little more to this, what has happened this last 5 or 6 years is, we lost count a long time ago of the number of people who not only knew us, who reached out and were like, oh my gosh, like you have no idea how healing, how hopeful this is for me that you're sharing this. But then people who we didn't know, who she's never met, who somebody that we know shared it with them and then reached out and were like, I grew up in church. This has been a massive struggle for me, and church has never really been a safe place for us to talk about this. And I mean, you can share a little bit more about that, but I think, the people piece, as in most things in life, can be the most challenging and also the most beautiful part of it, on both sides. And so what have you learned really in the last 5 or 6 years, kind of just being open and sharing with people?
I've learned you can't shut me up.
I learned that a long time ago.
For like myself, I've learned I've got to be who I am. And honestly, I'm too old at this point in my life. Like, you don't like it, that's okay. I am who I am. But I've also learned that there are a whole lot of people just like me, who are afraid to say anything or put their smile on. And I've also learned that God is present always in the mess, right? Like when I share, when I go out on a limb and actually share something really private and painful, like God's in that moment, and God has used it every time.
I think it's been really challenging and uncomfortable, because nobody, like we all, in the age of social media, we're all image managers, right? We manage the image that other people have of us and our family and our marriage and who we are. And in the age of managing your brand, it's uncomfortable to go out and let people see you. But the beauty of that has been, like, we realized, like, there are a whole lot of people who were in our situation, suffering silently, had nobody they could talk to, nobody they could turn to, and just sort of stumbled into this reality that we could be a voice for somebody. And as with everything in all of our journeys, is that the mess and the pain actually becomes the place that God uses to bring hope and freedom and a message of hope and freedom to other people. So one of the things that we wanted to do today is kind of give a little bit of a rundown. So because part of the story and part of the process is all of the different kinds of things that she's experienced and done that, in our estimation, have contributed to her healing and her being able to kind of get on top of it. And so we wanted to kind of give a little bit of a rundown of the treatment options for people who might not even know where to start, or maybe you have somebody that you love or care about and you're not even sure how to help them. So can you maybe just talk for a minute about the kinds of treatments that you've pursued, why you pursued them, what your experiences were like, etc.?
You guys have done them all. I've done them all.
I think it's true. I do.
When I first got diagnosed, I was only 19 or 20, and so right away I was with a psychiatrist and medication, a lot of medication, counseling. So that was like the initial thing I did, still in my parents' home. And then things did get better. We got married, things like our life started to take off.
I'm glad that was on the trend, the upward trend, us getting married.
So
glad that didn't come after things got real worse. We got married, things got really dark.
Anyhow. So things did get better, but I think the bulk of all my treatment stuff happened after 2016. Like initially right after Cheryl was killed, and we ended up in grief counseling, and I did some EMDR. Like that was my first thing I did. Then my grandpa and my nephew both passed within a month. And I ended up back at the doctor going, okay, I need something, I need some more meds. So that started a journey of medication that ended in 2017 where I was on 18 different meds. But like what I would say to medication is it saved my life, literally. God used lithium. Lithium is the drug that has saved my life. So I did that, did intensive outpatient therapy. I was doing TMS, which is like a magnetic treatment where they're trying to waken up that part of your brain that it's not working properly. So I'd go 3 times a week and sit with this machine that sounded like a woodpecker on my head. They're trying to stimulate that part of my brain, get it working again. But during doing that, I had a psychiatrist, I guess, in that office too. And they would meet with me weekly. And in one meeting, we were with the psychiatrist, and I said, "This isn't working. I don't want to be here anymore." That day, they didn't hospitalize me, but I said, "I'm going to check myself in." So I went to an outpatient therapy group. What else did I do? What am I missing? I
made a list.
I did cannabis. I did THC. You have a list?
Oils. Yeah.
Oils. I've done it all, I think.
I mean, I don't know if you've done it all. Like, you've done a lot.
Feels like I've done it all.
So definitely the medication thing can be tricky because there's so many different kinds. And honestly, in my experience, it actually takes, a minimum of 60 days for people to go through a cycle of medication to find out if it's actually going to work for them, for your doctor to actually dial in the right dosage. And there's so many different medications out there that, some work for some people and some don't. They're pretty hesitant, if you know anything about mental health drugs, they're pretty hesitant to kind of use lithium as a last resort. But it 100%, in those really dark moments, what was 100% what saved her life. But like inpatient stuff, group therapy, friends, we talked about kind of the proximity of the support system at church. I think nutrition, like supplements, a part of your journey has been, doing a sleep study and exercise and EMDR and TM and all of this stuff. And all of them played a role. None of them, there wasn't a cure-all. They all had different impacts for different lengths of time and helped kind of move her down the field and get her back on her feet. And I've said all along the last couple of weeks that medication, like this conversation doesn't end with taking pills. And as people who have benefited from her taking pills, like I say that we're not opposed to medication, but the end of your journey shouldn't be to go get medication. That might be part of the process that sort of levels you out so that you can actually begin to deal with maybe some of the therapy and the counseling, or do some of the supplements and get some exercise and get your life back on track in terms of nutrition and sleep and all that stuff. And
right.
so,
and I would say I'm not on meds now, but
right.
I'm not opposed to medication. What happened to me was not ideal, right? Because they just kept adding another pill and another pill and another pill for this side effect, that side effect. So 18 drugs later, I wasn't even myself in 2017 when we were in Riverside. But so I wanted off those meds. But while we've lived here, during 2020, when Jaron came home and all the world was falling apart, and I felt myself start to spiral. I was talking to my counselor, and I don't know, Mike, I think I need meds, but I don't want meds. They scare me, like back and forth, and just kind of finally landed on there's a season, and this is a season, and right now I need some medication, and it may not be forever, and so I took it for a few months again, and now I'm off it again, but
yep.
back and forth. Yeah,
and honestly, I mean, it sounds this could be the end of my pastoral career, but let's go there. And the thing that allowed her to actually begin to transition off of all of those medications was the ability to actually begin to take THC oil. And it was so much safer, so much better for her. And one by one, as she began to figure out like what actually worked for her, it allowed her to kind of just begin to wean herself off these medications. And lithium was the first one to go, and made just a huge difference. So what would you say to somebody who, about seeking treatment, who's maybe been afraid or hesitant or just trying to like white knuckle their way through some mental health situations?
Right. Well, I don't have the answer, so I don't know. But I would tell you that you could do it. Like I would say to try it, try something, do something, Change something. Start with something. You talked about nature and nurture and neighborhood, I think last week, and Even just starting there, right? Like, take care of yourself. Later, I think I say it, but rest is so important for me, and I've realized I can't have healthy thinking if I don't have rest. And so I would say you can do it. If you need help, I'll help you. I'll go to counseling with you. I'll go to the doctor I'll help you.
And then, just kind of continuing on that path, like what would you say to somebody who's maybe struggling with shame or guilt or trying to find God and peace in the middle of their mental health situation, or trying to help somebody they love in the middle of that?
That one's hard because that one makes me emotional, and because I felt so much shame and so much condemnation from the church and people in the church and Christians and people judging my lack of faith or my lack of joy, like the Spirit of the Lord and you got the joy of the Lord. And but I would tell you there's no shame. Like it's hard, it's emotional, but it also makes me really angry. It makes me really angry that people feel shame because my depression and my anxiety is no different than someone's diabetes or their allergies or their physical condition, right? Mine is just mental, but so I hate that. I hate the shame. The Bible says there's no condemnation in Jesus for those who are in Christ Jesus. And that's what I would say to you is there's no shame. Like I feel it and I'm emotional because I still feel that. I'm fighting it like crazy. But I would say I love you and you're perfect and you're not broken. You're good.
And I would just add, when you love somebody who this is a very real struggle in their life, that particular journey can be just as lonely and just as dark and just as hard. And you can't fix them. We have all these romantic ideas in our culture about how, love's ability to fix everything. And you definitely, hold on and love them, but your love's not going to fix them. And encourage them to seek help, and you find some help, and you begin to, because what happens is that even if you're not someone who's bent that way or is prone to suffer from those kinds of things, just the overwhelming journey of that, it will weigh you down. It will drag you in, and you are not alone. And a huge piece of this conversation for us here has been to just bring it all out into the light and talk about it so that people have permission to say stuff out loud that maybe they don't feel like they can. So talk a little bit just briefly about where you're at currently in your mental health journey, maybe even compared to a few years ago, and then kind of any last things that you want to share.
I think this is the good news. This is where it all gets happy, right? I'm stronger than
This is the part I've been waiting for.
I'm stronger than I've ever been, really. When I end my counseling calls, that's usually what my counselor says. How are you feeling now? He asked me when I come in. He's like, "How are you coming in?" I'm like, "Well, Mike, it's heavy. I'm anxious. I'm whatever, And so before we end, he says, "And how you going out, Hansi?" And I'm like, I'm going out stronger. I'm strong. Am I weary? Yes. Is it hard? Yes. Is it fair? No. Like that's been a big struggle of mine the last 20 years is like, this isn't fair. I didn't ask for this. He doesn't struggle like Tigger over here. And it's not fair. So do I still feel all that? Absolutely. But I'm stronger than I've ever been. And that's what I told actually my kids going into this, because a couple of them were going to be in here and I didn't want to upset Kai. And I'm like, Kai, just whatever I say, just remember, I'm like stronger than I've been since Daddy and I got married, like healthier than I've been, ready to fight Like, I didn't like this title at all, you guys. As soon as he brought it forward, I'm like, defeating depression, that's stupid. Like, I can't defeat this, but.
She has a hard time sharing what she thinks with me.
I do like but I can keep it from defeating me, and that's where I am. So just 3 years ago in Riverside was when I was on my 18 meds, and so I'm off. You asked, like, compared to 3 years ago, I was dealing with withdrawals. I was not in a good place. Not suicidal necessarily, but still not well. But I feel like I'm a whole different person right now.
Idaho healed you.
It did.
That's what I'm talking about. Come to Idaho,
people.
Get happy. Awesome. Would you give her a hand? Thanks, babe. So part of the reason why I wanted to bring up a bunch of the different things that she has done and some of the treatment options is that, and we've said this kind of every week, is that because there's no singular cause for anxiety or depression, and all of our situations are unique, there's likely not going to be a singular path of treatment for you to pursue. And so we've been using the analogy of having heart disease off and on during this series. And if you have heart disease, you will probably end up at some point taking some medication, but also you're going to need to lose some weight and start getting some exercise and sleep better and deal with nutrition and maybe try some supplements and change some stuff about your lifestyle and all that. So there's not going to just be, do a lot of people take medication and that's it for their heart disease? Yeah. Would they be better off if they did more? Of course. And I think that's a great sort of a way to encapsulate not only her journey, but what I think is true of all of us. And so anytime that we're actually going to grow or heal or change, whether it's spiritually or emotionally, physically, it actually requires us to address a whole bunch of stuff in our lives. And the problem is if you don't address the realities of your mental health, whether it's because of trauma or grief or brain chemistry, you're going to struggle because you might not even have the wherewithal to do the other kind of work that's necessary if you just can't get out of bed. In Matthew chapter 7, Jesus actually uses this illustration of people building their house on the sand and those who build a house on the rock. And he's making a point about our spiritual lives and our spiritual health, but I think it's a really good picture for us of our mental health as well. Like, I'm not saying any of this stuff is equivalent to Jesus. Please don't hear me saying that. It's not even close. But I do know that if you don't address some of this stuff, if you're prone or you struggle in this area, it's almost as if like you're building all or part of your life on the sand, and you can work really hard and build something that looks really good and do all this effort in all this other area of your life, but it's only a matter of time before it all is going to sink or crash into this giant black hole or quicksand of your mental health if you don't actually take care of your soul. And that's why some of this stuff matters. That's why I'm not afraid to talk about some of the treatments that she's done and the medication that she's done, because they don't replace your need to invest and change and grow and build your life, but they do help kind of stabilize you mentally and emotionally so that you actually can begin to do that work. And it's a lot, and it's not fair that you have to do all that work when other people like me don't, but that doesn't change it. And the good news is that you're not alone. All through the scriptures, there's this duality between us and God, where we see God working on our behalf, doing the things that only he can do. In fact, in Philippians chapter 1, verse 6, it says that being confident of this, that he who began a good work in you will carry it on until the completion of the day of Christ Jesus. And so that God is actually initiating something in your life, both spiritual, but it's not just spiritual, it's for your whole life, for you, right? And that when you step into relationship with Jesus, your life primarily becomes God's project, and that he is going to see it through to completion, that he's working in you and for you in ways that you cannot see. But then there's also this part of this, the equation that's on us, that without him, that we can do nothing, but because of him, we can do something, and the something that we can do, he won't do for us. In Philippians chapter 3, verse 12, it says, the same guy who just wrote that other verse, he said, not that I've already obtained all of this or have already arrived at my goal, but I press on to take hold of that for which Christ Jesus took hold of me. See, it's not either or, it's both and. It's living the life God has for you, and it's going to require you to learn who you are. It's going to require you to learn your strengths and your weaknesses, and it's going to require you to put in the work to feel and be whole. It's striving and straining and struggling forward. And so the questions that I want to maybe pose to you this morning, wherever you're at in this spectrum or this conversation, is what are the changes that you might actually need to make in your life? What are the things that you've been paying attention to, but it's kind of also what are the things that you've been neglecting? What lies have you told yourself about why you can't have that conversation, why you can't go find help, why you can't begin to address those parts of your life? So last week, I asked the band, I asked Charlie and Lisette to spend some time at the end with a song just to give us an opportunity to kind of sit and sort of think and reflect. And I asked them to do the same again this week. And so the song they're going to sing is a song we've sung before, and we're going to dismiss in just a moment when they're done. But I wanted to take just a couple of minutes and for us to just sit and have a conversation with God. And so during the song, you can sing along, the words are gonna be on the screen, or you can just sit and listen and think and pray. But I just wanna encourage you to allow God to begin to speak to you, whether it's about your own situation or the situation of somebody you love.